So anyone who knows me knows that I love to keep a busy schedule. I can juggle a lot of responsibilities, or so I thought. Recently, for the first time in my life, I started to experience symptoms of anxiety. I was super stressed out, even having a hard time breathing, and I didn't know what was going on. Like I said, I've always been someone who's been able to juggle a lot. A long to-do list, you name it, I've got this. So when I started having these panic attacks of sorts, and the burdens of my responsibility were becoming too much to handle, I realized that I'd reached the end of myself. I had limitations. Ashley Giovannucci is only human, and it was a very humbling experience. There's a character in the Bible who had a similar experience of sorts. His name's Elijah, and if you're familiar with the prophet of Elijah, you know that throughout his story, he experienced amazing spiritual victories with God. He defeated the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Fire came raining down from heaven. He had these moments of inspiration following God. He was on spiritual highs. And then suddenly we read that he's in the pits of despair and depression. In 1 Kings 19, we find him praying to God to die because it just becomes too much for him to handle. King Ahab and Jezebel basically send out a death threat for his life. He is afraid and he flees. And God comes to him in the moment of his despair, and the angel of the Lord says, well, what do you think he says? Do you think he says, Elijah, come on, you've got this. You're amazing. You can do it. No. The angel of the Lord admits to Elijah, this is too much for you. The angel of the Lord says, get up and eat, because this journey is too much for you. God actually validates Elijah's emotion of anxiety and despair that he's in over his head. That Elijah, this amazing prophet, is only human. Elijah had reached the end of himself. He had reached the end of his humanity. God came to him on human terms to give him the food and the drink and the sustenance that he needed to continue. God didn't leave him in the despair, but he acknowledged the despair, tended to his human needs, and then gave him a supernatural power that was not from Elijah, but was from God. When you have feelings of anxiety, when you realize that something is too much for you to handle, it's probably because it is. When we reach the end of ourselves, it's an opportunity to realize that this life was not meant to be lived on our own, but through the power of God in us. If we are followers of Christ, we are weak, but he is strong. And Paul writes about this in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We are jars of clay, but instead of focusing on our weakness, we need to focus on the power of God that lives within us. Because God does not keep us in our moments of despair. When we come to the end of ourselves, when we reach the end of ourselves, it's where true dependence on God begins.